Hello, my name is Simon Glendenning and I am the chair of the Carrick History Society. This year I have been a part of the Maybole Regenerations talks at the Town Hall. One of the talks that I performed earlier this year was on the Crannog dwellers of Loch Spoots, and by popular demand we are refilming the talk so that we can add this to our website, the South Ayrshire Council's YouTube page, just so that you can all listen to it. It was one of those talks that a lot of people wanted to attend, but it was at a funny time where a lot of those people couldn't actually come along. So this is why we're doing this. So the talk is called The Crannog Dwellers of Loch Spoots. Now, to begin with, we have to talk about the prehistoric ages. There are 5 prehistoric ages, and those are the Paleolithic, the Mesolithic, the Neolithic, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age. The Paleolithic is the first prehistoric age, and it begins in 450,000 years before the Common Era, all the way up to the Iron Age, which ended in the year 80 of the Common Era. So it's quite a wide range of time. So first of all, what is a crannog? A crannog was an ancient dwelling made of wood for prehistoric people to live in. And in this slide here, you can see Loch Crannogs, and in the middle of the loch is a little island covered in trees. And the prehistoric people would try and pick somewhere like this, like an island in the middle of a large body of water, to build a crannog because they would be protected on all sides from invaders. They would construct a walkway from the edge of the loch so that there would be one entrance and one exit that could be guarded easily. And through archaeological evidence, we know that in Loch Crannogs there were crannogs as well. But that's not within our area, that's just a good slide to demonstrate what a crannog site would look like. And on this slide here, the next slide, you can see that this is a crannog. This is in the Scottish Crannog Centre, or was, I should say, at the Scottish Crannog Centre, because unfortunately this full-scale replica of a crannog was burnt down a few years ago. They are in the process of rebuilding. At the moment they have a prehistoric village set up, and they are in the process of rebuilding it so that you can see what it looked like. But in this picture here you can see just what I said, a crannog built in the middle of a body of water with one walkway, and the surrounding area is protected by the body of water. Now, Loch Spoots is a big lake or loch just outside of Maybole, and in the late 1800s there was an archaeological dig undertaken before the loch was turned into the reservoir for the town. And in this picture here you can see, I believe this is from the Scottish Crannog Centre, they did some underwater photography of the remains of one of their crannogs, and you can see here the remains of the wooden stakes to hold the structure up. And these would have been treated with tar or some sort of material that would prevent the wood from rotting under the water. So in this slide, if you look at the arrow, that points to where Loch Spoots is. It's about a couple of miles south of Maybole. I think in a lot of the archaeological registers it's classed as Cross Hill or the Dalduff area, but the Dalduff area is referring to the farm which is nearby Loch Spoots. And here's a picture of Loch Spoots. I believe this was taken quite a while ago because the water level in that loch is much lower than it is in this photograph. You can see that this would be an ideal place for a crannog to be built, because again, it could be built in the middle of the lake or loch, which would protect from invaders. And there's quite hilly, rough terrain all around, which means that just adds another layer of protection. So as I said, in the late 1800s there was an archaeological dig undertaken. That was undertaken by Robert Munro, and I will show you a picture of him later on. But in this slide here, this is taken from one of Reverend Roderick Lawson's books on Maybole. Reverend Roderick Lawson was quite a prolific historian, a Victorian minister, way ahead of his time. He implemented a lot of change in the town, and he liked to record historical events that were happening, that he knew were going to be historical events around his time, and he also liked to delve into the history of the town as well. So using the information that he got from the archaeological dig, he decided to sketch this photograph to show you what the site of the Crannog would look like. So you can see here the loch, which looks like a field of grass. It's actually a body of water there, and the circular part in the middle shows the outline of where the Crannog was, and just in the distance you can see Kildoon Hill. So that kind of place is exactly where Lochspitz is in relation to the rest of the landscape. And as I said, here's a stained glass window depicting the very well-known amateur archaeologist Robert Munro. He undertook the dig at Lochspitz by himself and a small team of amateurs, recorded the site to within a millimetre of the correct dimensions of what was left in there. So if we use that archaeological record, we could actually go and retrace what he saw and put all the different objects back in exactly the right places. Now, as an amateur archaeologist, he went above and beyond what he was supposed to do. So if he found an artifact, he would take the dimensions of it and even the gravity reading of that object. And there's a few objects that he found that he actually sketched as well. And when you compare them to the actual object that exists today at the National Museum in Edinburgh, he did a pretty good job. But we'll show you some more of those later. So here's another sketch of Lochspitz. Now, I said that the water level at Lochspitz was very low at the time of this archaeological dig because they were draining the loch to basically clear all the debris inside it and refill it to become the reservoir for the town. But Robert Munro took the opportunity to go down to the loch and basically check out what he could see in there. He, knowing his history, had an idea that there may well be some remains in there, and he was correct. So this sketch here shows you a bit of what was left in the loch when the water was drained, so you can see a lot of wood and debris in there. So he meticulously poked about in the soil and silt and found lots of different objects. He took some examples of the wood aside as well. I believe they found a log canoe here as well. I believe it is also in the National Museum, not on display in permanent storage. It's one of those objects that's made of wood and has to be kept in a stable environment because it's very fragile. But a little bit later on I will show you a couple of wooden remains that we have. So in this next slide here, this gives you an idea of what the people would look like inside their Crannog. So as you can see, they are all wearing natural fibre materials, of course. They would have spun their own wool, they would have done their own weaving, they would have made their own garments. Most of the materials in here are wood. The Crannog's made of wood. There's iron. You can see there's an iron cauldron held up by an iron chain. The man in the foreground is, I think he's getting his weapons. I think he's about to go out and do some hunting. There's a guy on the right hand side who's sitting on a wooden chair. So all of these objects would have been made by the people living in the Crannog. And so we move on to some of what I've called the relics from the deep. So the first one here is a spindle whorl, and if you've watched the video on the spinning I think it was just the spinning video where we're demonstrating how people would spin wool from the raw material and show you some of the finished articles. A spindle whorl was a weight attached to a stick, and it was a very simple and effective way to spin wool. And if you go back to that video, I do mention more about spindle whorls and I demonstrate how to spin wool. But in the next slide here, there's a recreation of a spindle whorl. As I said, it's just a stick with a weight on it. And on the right hand side of this picture is a similar spindle, a drop spindle that I used in the spinning video. Here are two objects made of bronze that were found in the Crannogs. So this shows you that that site would have been occupied right up to the last sort of prehistoric era age. The object on the left, I think they call it a piece of jewellery. I'm not sure, I haven't seen that one in person yet. And on the right hand side you can see a key. So by the Bronze Age they were obviously developing lockable technology. I'm not entirely sure whether that would have been from a Crannog. I don't think they would have locked a Crannog. It may well be that that key is from a different structure that was there. Unfortunately, we can't do any more archaeological work at the loch because it's, I believe it's in private hands now. If the water levels were reduced even more for whatever reason, I think someone could make some arrangement with the person that owns that land and do some more investigation. But we shall see what happens. Then we have another piece of jewellery. Now this is a jet cross that was found. You need to also remember that prehistoric people were very religious. This cross would indicate that the people who lived in this site had come across Christianity. And as you know, Crescregil Abbey is nearby as well, so I'm not sure if the two areas sort of work together. But jet is an interesting material. It's related to coal, I believe. It's sort of on that spectrum of materials. You can carve it. This cross I have actually seen. It is on display in the National Museum in Edinburgh. The sketch on the right hand side is in the Archaeological Survey, and the picture on the left is one that I took from the National Museum, and you can see that even the finest little cracks and dents have been put into the sketch as well. Here's another example of a jet cross. This one's a bit cruder on the right hand side. This one was found closer to Dalduff Farm, so it may be from the same Crannog area that they've just dropped it on their way out walking somewhere. Here's more examples of jewellery. So this here is a rock crystal amulet. So this is carved crystal. This was an interesting find. This is one of the things that Robert Monroe took the gravity reading from. I believe that's important in glass, crystal and precious gems. I don't know enough about it to explain that, but this one is definitely on display at the National Museum, and it's listed as coming from Loch Spoots, so anyone from this area that sees that name will get quite excited. Maybe not as excited as I got when I saw that, but that's just me. And here's a bit of a better view of the display as it is in the National Museum. So you can see rock crystal amulet, Loch Spoots, and here next to some more examples of other pieces of jewellery, some made from stone, some made from amber, and then you have things like imitation jet pendants as well. Here is an example of some pottery that was found. This is Roman terra sigillata pottery. That's red pottery. So the Romans, or the people that lived in the Crannog, found some Roman pottery on their travels and took it up to Loch Spoots, but this was definitely found there. Whether that was before or after the people that lived in the Crannog, we don't know, but it just shows you that that area has got a lot of evidence from different time periods. The piece on the left is a sketch from the Archaeological Survey, and on the right is just an example of what a piece of that pottery would look like in one piece. As well as jewellery that's on display at the National Museum, there's also this interesting display here. So this was a find that was discovered near Dilduff Farm, and it was a cauldron made of bronze, and it was filled with axe heads. So here is an exact, there's 4 axe heads at the front there, the handles from the cauldron are left. Now that doesn't really mean much when you say that they're axe heads, they're quite small. So you have to look at it in context, which I have an example of here. So it's not your usual medieval style axe that would have a huge blade on it. This is a much smaller blade, and it's designed to be used on different handles, so the handles could be replaced, and then it's held onto the handle with a piece of string leather on that loop at the bottom. And this small axe would be to basically to trim off smaller branches to use in their fires, or to use for some of the delicate cutting for repairing the crannog, or for other bits and pieces. This is about how big the axe heads were at the time. I think this is probably how big they could make them without them not being for the intended purpose. So these are hollow in the middle. If they made them on a bigger scale, they would dent and they would bend and they would break, so they wouldn't be very good for cutting wood. So this is a seal matrix depicting a monk of Crannogs Abbey, and what these would be used for is if someone wrote a letter at Crannogs Abbey, they would seal the envelope with wax, and this seal matrix would be pressed into the wax so that the person who is receiving the letter, if this wax seal was intact, no one has tampered with the letter, it has been sealed by the person that wrote the letter inside. And I just think it's one of those fascinating relics that have survived all this time. We don't use wax seals anymore. Well, we don't for everyday use, but there are some people that use them for like wedding invitations and that sort of thing. It has its own sort of interest groups out there, but it would be interesting to see what this would look like as a wax seal. I just thought I would add that in there. So that's quite a brief, quick run through of Crannogs in our area, and particularly in nearby Loch Spoots. And I mentioned at the beginning the Scottish Crannog Centre. I would say that they are the absolute authority in anything related to Crannogs, and I encourage you to visit their website to find out more, and even go up there and have a visit. The website's on that slide there. So that's about all I have to say on the subject of Crannogs at Loch Spoots. But before we finish, I did mention that there were some artefacts made of wood that were found at the site that have ended up in our possession, as in the Carrick History Society's possession. And these are these here. So this is an example of petrified wood which has been underwater for hundreds, if not thousands of years. These are believed to have been found at Loch Spoots and have been coated in some sort of varnish to stop them disintegrating. The bottom has been flattened and they've been turned into a sort of decorative piece. This particular one here has a hole, and this bit is a long sort of nail shape, so this could have been a part that fitted into a hole, so this could have been part of a joint, we don't know. We would like to do some carbon dating on these objects to see just how old they are and whether they are actually from Loch Spoots. We have it on good authority that these are. There certainly are pieces of petrified wood, we know that much. So these objects are just good to have when you're talking about Crannogs and prehistoric people, because we know that these are at least old enough to have touched into maybe even the latest of the prehistoric ages, and it just gives you that bit of tangible evidence that makes you appreciate the subject matter a bit better. So Thank you very much for listening to this talk. Be sure to have a look at the other talks that we did this year. These are available, they should be available on the Carrick History Society website as a link to the YouTube video. And keep an eye out on the Maybole Regeneration page for future talks that will be taking place next year. Thank you.